Okay, so I have tried to make this video like 5 times and it just keeps disappearing from my laptop. So hopefully it'll work this time. So we're talking about Bobby Joe Long, and this is going to be kind of a sexually explicit episode because of who Bobby Joe Long was. And when we get to Albert DeSalvo later in the book, that one will be sexually explicit too. So, the way people describe Bobby Joe Long's sex drive is in one word: unbelievable. But for several women in Tampa, Florida, and actually not just Tampa, but other places in Florida, it became all too believable, but it also became deadly. So, Bobby Joe Long claims that all of his troubles started in 1974. So in 1974, he was in a really bad motorcycle accident. He was driving down the road on his motorcycle when he claims a car suddenly appeared in front of him. So I don't know if this car turned, or if it switched lanes, or if he just wasn't paying attention and then suddenly like zoned back in on his driving and the car was here. Anyway, he slams on his brakes. The force of that propelled him into the car in front of him through the back windshield hard enough to crack his helmet. Since his helmet was cracked, it didn't do what it was supposed to do, and he had brain troubles. He had brain problems. And so after that accident, sex was all he could think about. So before the accident occurred, he would have sex with his, as the book describes her, slim and pretty wife, Cindy Jean. He'd have sex with her 2 to 3 times a week. That's pretty normal, okay? After the accident, he would have sex 2 or 3 times a day, on top of him masturbating 5 or 6 times a day. So he had a very, very, very high sex drive after this accident. So now, soon enough, sex with Cindy Jean, his slim, pretty wife, wasn't enough, and he wanted other women as well. So in 1980, so 6 years after the accident, he starts looking in want ads, television, furniture, what have you. And he would go to the houses and he would rape the women. He'd go in the middle of the day because he was sure men wouldn't be there, men would be at work, and he'd go and he'd rape the women. And he became known as the want ad rapist because he would go to these people's houses under the presumption of, I saw your want ad, and then he'd rape them. So he did this more than 50 times between 1980 and 1983. So, this was like a constant thing, So the local task force and the FBI were after him, and he still was able to avoid being captured, which is crazy. But as the rapes continued, he also felt a rising sense of anger in him, and nobody knows what caused that. It's just the smallest thing would set him off, would just have an explosive reaction. Like one time his mother, Luella, which is a beautiful name by the way. Anyway, his mother Luella was visiting, and she said something that just did not sit right with Bobby Joe. So he grabbed her and put her over his knee and spanked her like a child, which, was absurd and painful. But for her, it was humiliating as well. Because, this is her son who's treating her like a child. So it was humiliating. It was a humiliating event for her. But it wasn't just things people would say. Any slight noise would set Bobby Joe off and just have this crazy explosive reaction. So whatever was cooking inside him, in 1983, he changed from rapist to killer and eventually serial killer. So his first murder victim, was a Vietnamese woman named Nguyen Thai Long. I might be mispronouncing that. I don't speak Vietnamese, but that's how it looks. So he somehow was able to lure her into his car, like Ted Bundy did. Ted Bundy always lured victims into his car. He tied her up, took her to an isolated spot, raped, and then killed her. Strangled her, and then dumped her on the side of the road. Now, one of the prosecutors, Mike Benito, would eventually say that Bobby Joe Long set his car up to serve his murderous needs. So, I'm going to tell you how. The passenger seat could lay down flat. And that's still true in most cars. Most cars you can lay the passenger and the driver's seat down flat. Anyway, so he'd lay the passenger seat down flat, And then he would get the women into his car, tie them up, and then lay them down on the seat. That way their head was below the windows and nobody knew they were there, basically. And with one hand, he would drive the car, and with the other hand, he would molest them while he was driving. So it was probably an automatic. Not that that's important, but he would then, when he got to where he was taking her, the isolated spot, he'd rape and then kill her. That was his MO. That's what makes him a serial killer. Well, that's not what makes him a serial killer. 3 murder victims is what makes him a serial killer. But he did the same thing every single time, except like once or twice. And we'll get into that. So almost any woman was fair game, except for one thing that they all shared. So when men go to bars, because he was visiting strip bars or strip joints, bars, and dives along Nebraska Avenue in Tampa, Florida. Nebraska Avenue? Yeah. Nebraska Avenue. Okay, I just want to make sure. But he'd frequent those places. When men go to those places, typically they will try to pick up women. Definitely bars, definitely dives. Not sure about strip joints, but anyway. He'd go there. And the women had to approach him, had to try to pick him up. Because if they picked him up, then he saw them as manipulative and detestable whores. So in his eyes, if they were manipulative and detestable whores, they deserved to be killed. So they had to pick him up. So 8 victims behind him, something strange happens. So following his usual pattern, he picked up, in the book's word, a big, sexy woman named Kim Son in North Tampa. Okay? Now, this is what's different. This is what was strange. Well, this is what struck me as strange, but this is what was strange for Bobby Joe. So he picked her up, but she was a fighter. So as soon as she's in the car and she realizes what's going to happen, she starts fighting. She starts screaming. So, somebody's fighting and screaming, you're not going to be able to... He ends up choking her into unconsciousness because he knows he can't control her if she's conscious. So he ends up choking her into unconsciousness. Eventually she wakes up and she starts fighting him again. So he ends up strangling her to death. But after he strangles her, he had no energy to violate her sexually. It was as if his frantic sexual energy had dissipated during the attack, the strangulation attack. So there was an encounter 2 days before the attack on Kim Son that was even stranger. So he picked up a 17-year-old girl but didn't kill her. And the reason he didn't kill her is because in his mind, she was not a whore or a manipulator of men. She was a homeless girl rejected by her own family. And he picked her up. She didn't come to him. So this did not keep him away from her sexually. He still violated her sexually. But after 24 hours with him, he just dropped her off where he picked her up. Just dropped her back off on the street. But now he kept her blindfolded through most of the ordeals, but there were times that she was able to see him. She was able to glimpse his apartment. She was able to see him at the ATM. And he knew he was putting himself in jeopardy, but he did nothing to stop it. She was able to see him. So it was actually her descriptions of him that led to his capture. And it didn't surprise him. He wanted to be caught, and he knew he eventually would be, which might be why he put himself in jeopardy and didn't try to stop it, because he wanted to be caught. So as time had gone by, he had started getting more and more revulsion, not remorse, revulsion to what he had done and what he was doing still when he was captured. So less than a year after he was arrested, he was tried on multiple homicide charges. And there was a lot of evidence against him. So there was a testimony of the girl he had raped, but not killed. And his defense counsel was trying so hard to build a medical case saying, this is why he did it. Because they brought up the accident from 1974. They said, the motorcycle accident caused trauma, which there was no doubting. Okay, the brain scans showed it. He even had physical problems, like his face felt dead on one side, and he walked with a limp. So, it was obvious that he had brain injuries. But they say that was the precipitating factors because, Before the brain injuries, his counsel argued that there had been no offenses, and they were correct. His counsel was correct. There had been no offenses. After the accident, there had been the 50-plus rapes of the wanted rapist and the 9 kills. So, the defense counsel failed, however, to make an adequate connection. They did not effectively establish a connection between the injuries and the actions. So, the jury didn't think it was reason enough for his crimes and found him guilty, and in early 1895, he was sentenced to death in the electric chair. Now, when this book was published in 2009, I think? Yeah, 2009, he was still on death row. He was, however, killed 10 years later in 2019. So, it took years and years and years for him to be put to death, which isn't really that uncommon. Ted Bundy was on death row for a long time before he was killed. He was on death row for 34 years before he was finally killed. I just did the math on my phone. So, the defense couldn't prove that Long's head injury had caused his crimes, but there were some things in his childhood that probably contributed to how he turned out. So, he was an only child raised by a single mother. She was an attractive woman and a waitress who lived on the edge of poverty after divorcing her husband. So, I'm not even sure Bobby Joe Long knew his father. But until he was 12, Long and his mother shared a hotel room, shared a bed in this hotel room. So she said that they didn't have the money for 2 bedrooms. However, she also stated that she never undressed in front of him or did anything else inappropriate. And then when she finished with her waitressing jobs, instead of going home or to the hotel to spend time with her son, she'd go out on dates and had neighbors at the hotel watch him. So Bobby Joe would go into rages over his mother's lack of concern or caring for him, and her work and dating schedule also angered him in terms of the time she would come home at 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning when he'd be getting ready to go to school. So they spent very little time together, which, she failed to mention when they interviewed her. So again, when he was 12, he stopped sleeping with his mother, but whatever damage that had done, there was no reversing it and there was no going back. It was done. And yes, sleeping with a grown woman can diminish young boys in a way, and that's probably what happened, is he was sleeping with a grown woman and it diminished him. So, when reviewing serial killers, psychiatrists have found that the ones who are the most deadly are the ones who feel diminished by women. So they also think that shame might have been a factor, and when it was coupled with the terror and rage, it turned deadly. It turned murderous. So, that is all I have on Bobby Joe Long. I might skip ahead and do Henry Lee Lucas next, because I cannot wait to do Henry Lee Lucas. It's kind of, it's going to sound so bad, it's kind of a morbid fascination with what Henry Lee Lucas went through, but I will let you know. I haven't decided yet, but I will see you in my next video.